morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're listening or watching from in the world. Of course, welcome back to the U-Turn Up Show right here on GBKM FM. Of course, I'm your host, Romain Redman, and we'll be going from 3 p.m. until 4 p.m. right here on the #1 web radio station right here in the great city of Toronto. Of course, this GBKM FM, where we aim to just enlighten you, inspire, and of course, here on the U-Turned Up Show, hope to energize today's youth so that they too can take on the challenges of this world and help us to be resilient human beings. Of course, on the show, we always encourage you to participate in our conversations. To do so, you can go to our platforms. They're on Facebook at Great Benin Kingdom Media. You can also get us on YouTube, GBKM TV. On our website, www.gbkm.fm. You can also get us on TuneIn app, it's GBKM. And don't forget, get our app from our website and take us with you wherever you go in the world. Of course, kind sponsorship of AOF Immigration Canada for bringing us to you each and every week. Don't forget, they specialize in all your immigration needs, ranging from permanent residency, Quebec Investor Program, student visa, whatever your needs may be, they have you covered. So give them a call for your private and your confidential consultations, and they promise that they'll take very good care of you when you do. The phone number is 416-629-4617. You can also send them an email. It's at info@aofimmigration.com. And you can also visit their offices. That's if you're in Canada. They're located at 5800 Ambler Drive in Mississauga, Ontario. So the last time on the show, we presented part 3 of our series, and we spoke about youth homelessness. An issue which is all too important for our society, and especially going into the future and building back from COVID-19, we need to ensure that no one is left behind. This week we continue said series, but we present to you this week policies. Policies. Those are all we need to ensure that everything runs smoothly. And of course, as we always do on the U-Turned Up Show, we bring to you our panelists of guests who will help us to break down those discussions. So you definitely don't want to miss this. We'll take our very first break, but we'll be right back with so much more after these messages.
Do you know who you are? What is your name?
Sometimes you wonder why and wonder how. Don't be alone, just stay calm, cause even if you choose or not to.
My child, recite the words of this ancient mythology. The wisdom I disperse in this verse, no apology. Memorize to keep you from evil theology. For you, the darker hue, Niger equality. See, for generations we perpetrated psychology. Divide and conquer each other, really lynch policy. You cannot build each other up, how will you build economy?
Wonderful. MFM. Of course, I'm your host, Romain Redman, and we'll be going on till 4 p.m. So if you're just tuning in, you haven't missed anything. We're just diving into today's show, and it's one that is promised to be so informative and, of course, eye-opening as we delve into some of those policies that will help us to really build back and build stronger as a province. Of course, my guest with us in studios here this week is one who knows the policy landscape all too well and has been in the front lines fighting for Ontarians. Of course, it's no doubt as to the ravishing effects that has swept across the province due to COVID-19. And as we build back, and to build back stronger, resilient and strong policies will be needed. Family, please help me welcome to the show, of course, leader for the official opposition, Ms. Andrea Horwath, to the show. Ms. Horwath, welcome. I must start there.
Well, thank you very much, Romain. It's my pleasure to spend some time with you today.
Absolutely. And it's on an issue that we are all too passionate about. We have to ensure that all Ontarians are protected and are thriving emerging from COVID-19.
Oh, I would agree. There are lots of different things in different policy areas that will help us do that. And I'm happy to talk about some of those things if you'd like.
Absolutely, definitely. So let's jump into it. Last week, over the past 2 weeks, of course, your party and yourself has put together 2 comprehensive, and I call it comprehensive because of how thin in terms of it gets to the point. It gets to the point of what Ontarians want, what Ontarians need, and what Ontarians demand. So it's, for one, small businesses, right? thriving marginalized communities, and of course our long-term care homes, which have been the most heavily impacted part of our society in over the course of COVID-19. So let us start off with the Saving Main Street proposal that you've put forward, you and your colleagues.
Sure. I mean, I can just launch into it, but a little bit of context. I mean, I really have been concerned, worried about the ability of our small and medium-sized businesses in Ontario to weather the storm with COVID-19. And back in April, we put together a Save Main Street plan, and then we've kind of we've got now Save Main Street 2.0. That we put together and released just about 2 weeks ago, maybe. And the point is that the more we can do to shore up these small businesses and keep them afloat during COVID-19, the better off we're going to be when it comes to our ability to bounce back. If businesses and main streets are closing up shop for good, then it's going to be that much harder to get people back to work, to get good jobs happening once COVID is over. And so we took a look at what businesses were asking for, what they were recommending, and we put together this Save Main Street plan. And I have to say I'm pretty proud of it, and I'm pretty determined to try to get Mr. Ford and his government to start taking up some of the recommendations that we've been making. And it's everything from recommendations that strike to the financial desperation that many businesses are finding themselves in. So direct support for things like rent, for example. So what we've been saying to the Ford government is you need to, businesses did their part when we asked them to shut down, and now more of us in the second wave have just been asked to do the same thing again, or to severely restrict once again what they're doing, particularly in the restaurant industry and others. But what we haven't done is said, you're doing this for us, you're helping to stop the spread, and here's what we're going to do for you to make sure that you can make it through, even though you're not able to make any revenue. So one of the biggest fixed costs that people have in the business community, the people that are running restaurants and gyms and all kinds of other establishments, is their rent. And you have no revenue coming in. What you need is some help to pay the rent. So our Save Main Street plan includes up to 75% direct rent subsidy that's straight up. I mean, it doesn't have to be repaid, up to $10,000 a month to help businesses stay afloat. So that even if your revenues are like severely restricted, you'll still be able to pay the landlord. And then the other piece of that is to make sure that you're not being drained with the other big fixed cost, which is utilities. Now, apparently, Mr. Ford's going to be coming up with something when it comes to the utilities. We don't know what that is yet. I think he's made a commitment, but we haven't seen anything tangible. And I would just urge him to get moving on these things, because I mean, these are people's livelihoods, right? These are, the blood, sweat, and tears that folks have put into their businesses are what's at stake here. And we really, really need to give them some sense of, what the future is going to be like, and what we're going to do to step up and help them. But there's a particular set of businesses that are extremely important that have had a harder time traditionally to access capital, for example, or to qualify for traditional financing and those kinds of pieces. And this is something that we've amplified in terms of an ask from the Black Canadian Chamber of Commerce, or the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce, and this the president there, Andrea Barrett, has been calling on governments of all levels to recognize some of the unique challenges that Black owned and operated small businesses have that are different than other businesses, and let's set a separate fund aside to make sure that there are grants and pockets of money accessible specifically to keep those businesses afloat. And so, I mean, just in terms of some of the financial pressures, we're absolutely committed to continuing to fight to get some of these resources made available, financial resources to help keep those businesses afloat. There are many others, and I mean I could certainly go on a litany of listing them, but those are some of the the major ones.
But a quick point there, though, Ms. Horwath. You did mention the fact that there has been a number of consultations being held within the community. You spoke with the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce. We know you've been talking to a number of interest groups in our community. But just a little introspection here, though. What has the discussion between yourself and the Premier been like throughout this entire pandemic? And I'm not just talking about what you played out on or television screens or what we see coming out of Parliament, but what happens behind closed doors? What are those discussions like?
Well, Romain, sadly, not much. We've reached times, and then there's been a response, but really the government has not been embracing the opposition parties at all in an ongoing way. In fact, in some instances, quite the opposite, which has been disappointing. But I can tell you that hasn't deterred me. And what we've done right from the get-go has been to try to be productive, try to be not just criticizing, but try to provide ideas and suggestions and recommendations. And we've done that in a number of ways. So Save Main Street is one of them. But there are literally hundreds of letters with recommendations and ideas that my various critics have sent to the Premier and to the Health Minister and to the economic ministers that are involved with the economic recovery and trade and I mean really we've done an enormous amount of work to try to put on the radar of the government some of the solutions that we think would work for Ontarians. And we did that because that's what people expect. Especially in the early days, what we really wanted to show Ontarians is that we can all, put our ideas forward, and we can not just, we didn't think criticizing the government was the right way to go. We thought the more productive thing to do was to be proactive, to provide ideas, to provide recommendations. And unfortunately, we got very little to no feedback whatsoever on anything that we provided the government. And I mean, that's their prerogative. They're a majority government, and they get to set the course for Ontario. But it was a little disappointing to see that many of our ideas and recommendations have been overlooked. And that's their prerogative. But that's not stopping us from continuing to put some good ideas out there. To base those ideas on listening to what people in community are telling us. And with Save Main Street, that's particularly the business community. But as you mentioned, we also have another plan around long-term care, and that comes from listening to folks front lines of that, very horrifying situation that's been happening with the COVID-19 in long-term care. But on the business side, it's been quite amazing. There have been some federal programs, as you probably know, in terms of rent and payroll help and those kinds of things. But if you're
commercial rent assistance, and commercial rent assistance also.
Yeah, commercial rent assistance. Yeah, but part of the feedback that we got it was that those federal programs have been very difficult to access. They're quite complicated. The application process is quite complicated. It takes a lot of effort and resources, and of course the initial programs were such that it was up to the landlord to apply for the rent relief as opposed to the tenant, the commercial tenant, which really didn't make much sense because those landlords that weren't interested simply didn't bother, and so landlords somehow got to decide which small businesses were going to get the relief package and which ones weren't. So the federal government's like reviewing all that and rejigging all that finally. But in the meantime, we've already lost a lot of businesses. A lot of our main streets across Ontario have become quite challenged in terms of the number of for lease signs and the number of doors that have been closed. And of course, for every business that closes, that also means jobs being lost. Certainly, the business owner and sometimes their families are the most, we think of them first, obviously, because they take a huge hit. But, let's not forget that small business is often described as the backbone of our economy. Can't let that backbone disappear. Otherwise, the economy is going to really have a hard time bouncing back.
Absolutely. And I like that you touched on the long-term care debacle that went on during the COVID-19. So you have actually issued a plan for that also in terms of $750 million plan. To the tune of that, over which will stretch over some 8 years for its full fruition. But let us dive into that one, because that one is a particularly interesting one in the sense that our long-term care home facilities were very hard hit during the COVID-19 crisis. So basically what I'm seeing going here, you're investing in people, so hiring more staff, ensuring that training is up, and the big part, stop privatization.
Yeah. You know what, Romain? I'm pretty proud of the plan that we revealed last week, and what it really is it's a platform plank. That we're going into an election in 2022, and watching what happened as COVID tore through those long-term care homes was horrifying and heartbreaking. And families have been devastated. As you said, at this point, I think the count is around 1,900, almost 2,000 seniors. And people who are vulnerable lost their lives to COVID-19 in long-term care. And that didn't have to happen. And of course, we're in the second wave now, and it's happening all over again. We've got over 50 long-term care. I think that 50 was the number today. I can't recall specifically, but we've got many long-term care homes again in outbreak. We've got people dying again in long-term care. So the lessons weren't learned by the government back through the summer, and that's just not acceptable. So the reason why, though, this happened in the first place is because long-term care has been broken for a long time. That system has been dysfunctional for a very long time, and certainly COVID kind of tore back the curtain on what's going on in long-term care. And thanks to the Canadian Armed Forces that did some of that revelation with a report that they wrote when they had been asked to go in to some of our long-term care homes to help out. They issued a report that was just devastating in terms of its detail and what people were, what they were living with as residents.
The conditions which existed inside.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, the conditions which existed inside.
Yeah, I mean, the conditions existing inside were horrifying, and now we're hearing even more of that because there's a commission that the government has put in place that's reviewing some of these pieces. I mean, we heard just last week about a case where there's a resident in long-term care that literally was 3 months without being taken out of bed. Wow. The neglect, people dying, literally dying of malnourishment and becoming very ill with dehydration, losing their lives to malnourishment and dehydration. I mean, that should never happen. But we've known for years that, residents with bed sores that literally eat through their flesh right to the bone, unexplained bones broken and bruising. And I mean, it's been awful. And so COVID helped to kind of show Ontarians who didn't have this knowledge or understanding of what was going on, what was really going on in long-term care. And so it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, one of the things that happened with COVID is it became very clear that the long-term care homes that are operated for a profit, so the for-profit homes, had far more outbreaks than the not-for-profit and government-run homes, the municipally run homes. Yes. And they also had, with those outbreaks, they also had a larger number of people who perished, people who died. And so it really, I think, shows that when you're trying to pull profits out of a system like long-term care, it forces you to cut corners and, keep a lid on the staff. And you don't hire full-time staff because there's costs, payroll costs that come with that. And so you really cut corners to try to, save your dollars,
money, essentially,
put in the pockets of your shareholders, really.
Yeah. So, but when we look at, because the Premier did, in fact, a couple of days ago, made some announcements in terms of his investment to ensure that long-term care homes will be taken care of going forward. For one, they started off by saying $2 to $3 increase in wages for workers. That's PSWs, support care workers, $10 million for new PSWs, $14 million for PSW training, $1.3 million to get 160 support workers trained, $450 million for long-term care homes operating throughout the pressures of COVID-19. That is a sum. It's not a small sum. It is a huge sum. Why is this not enough?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. And of course, any amount that the government finally decides to invest is necessary. But what I would first of all say is it's too late. They should have been investing that money through the summer. The second wave is it's already on us. People are already dying in long-term care again. So an announcement that he made in the last week or two doesn't really, help when all of that investment has to actually get through the pipe. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, training of these PSWs, great. Start training PSWs, but how long is that going to take? In the meanwhile, how many more people are going to die in long-term care? Hiring more PSWs, fantastic. You should have been doing that in the summer so that when hit, those pieces were all in place. So Mr. Ford has dithered and delayed and tried to save a buck over these last number of months instead of making those investments to shore up long-term care. And look, with all respect, Romain, this is not just me saying that. A couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, a letter was sent to the Minister of Long-Term Care from all of the long-term care operators, the ones that are public and not-for-profit, as well as the privately owned ones, or rather the for-profit ones, as well as the workers, as well as the family councils and the resident councils, everybody on the same page, saying to the Ford government, you need to help us. We're not ready for the second wave of COVID-19. And so it's been such a long delay. They squandered the opportunity in the summer to actually put some of these things in place. And I still think that these investments are necessary, and hopefully eventually they'll start having an impact. But we're already in a crisis. The homes, we've already got, as I said, growing numbers of outbreaks, growing numbers of people dying in long-term care, and there was no need for this whatsoever. There was no need for this to happen. And so that sits directly at the feet of Doug Ford because he didn't want to spend the money when he should have through the summer. But look, we also haven't seen the profits coming out of long-term care. So they haven't committed to the profits coming out of long-term care. And with the wage increases for PSWs, it's temporary. So they already had a temporary wage increase for PSWs, which has expired. Now they're offering another temporary wage increase for PSWs up until March of next year. But I mean, who wants to, get a job in this field when it's been chronically underfunded, chronically underpaid, and the message you're getting is, well, for the next couple of months, we'll pay a little bit, but once that's finished, you're back to 16, 17 bucks an hour, in some cases less. If we call these people our frontline heroes, which we call them, and rightfully so, they're our frontline heroes right now. They were our frontline heroes for the last 2 decades, taking care of our loved ones in long-term care, our grandmas, our grandpas, our moms, our dads. And when March comes in next year, in 2021, they're still going to be our frontline heroes. So suggesting that for just a short period of time, we value their work, their contributions, the care that they give our loved ones, that's not good enough. We have to make permanent changes in the long-term care system and the home care system. And that's what our plan is all about. It's about making the commitment to completely overhaul long-term care and home care so that the next group of seniors going through over the next number of years, and the generation after that and the generation after that, don't have to be afraid to go into long-term care. They don't have to have family members, that feel guilty for putting them in long-term care. They can actually have, dignified and supported and supportive environments to live out their eldest years.
Yes. Absolutely, and Ms. Horwath, I want to just say thank you so much for your time today. I think we are on our time mark here, but valuable information imparted here today, of course, and contained in these documents. Of course, for all my viewers out there, you can just visit the NDP's website and you can read more about what it's actually offering. We're talking about investment in people that live in long-term care facility, making long-term care public. We're talking about saving Main Street. We're talking about wage subsidies, freezing freezing utility payment for small and medium-sized businesses, keeping workers safe, building the recovery efforts, and of course ensuring that there's no gouging that happens for our small and medium-sized businesses. But of course, again, Ms. Horwath, thank you so much for joining, and we'll pick this up after the break with your colleague, Dr. Laura May Lindo, as we delve into some of what recovery effort looks like. But of course, do enjoy your day and the rest of your day, that is, okay?
Thank you so much. You did the same. Thanks,
And
Romaine.
you are welcome. And for all you our viewers here at home, we'll take a very second break here on the show, but we'll be right back with so much more. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, my name is Miriam Akpata, host of Global News Check. Debuting on Thursday, November 5th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the award-winning television station in Canada, JBKM. On Global News Check, I'll be bringing you burning issues all over the world as it affects you and I. I'll be asking questions and interviewing key players in the industry. I'll be bringing to the table the truth behind the truth. Don't forget to join me on www.gbkm.tv. Global News Check, where we bring the truth to the front line.
Do you know who you are? What is your name?
Sometimes you wonder why and wonder how. Don't be alone. Just stay calm, cause even if you choose or not to.
My child, recite the words of this ancient mythology. The wisdom I disperse in this verse, no apology. Memorized to keep you from evil theology. For you, the darker hue, you denied your equality. See, for generations we perpetrated psychology. Divide and conquer each other, really lynch policy. You cannot build each other up, how will you build economy?
And of course, welcome back to the U-Turn Show right here on GBKM FM. Of course, if you're just joining us, you only missed the first half of the show, but we have so much more to come in our second half of the show. And of course, our videos are always posted to our platforms after, so you can start again from the beginning. Before we went on our second commercial break, we had with us a leader of the official opposition, Ms. Andrea Horwath, and she was just giving us some insights and of course, breaking down her Saving Main Street policy as well as her plans for long-term care. But of course, I'm being joined right now by the chair for the Ontario Black NDP's Black Caucus, that is Dr. Laura May Lindo. Ms. Lindo, of course, welcome back. You're taking over from your leader as we continue.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you on the U-Turn Show. I must say, this is your third time here, and it's always a pleasure to have you joining us. But of course, the topic on today's agenda, the last time we were here, we spoke about policy in regards to the police and ensuring that violence ends in our society against marginalized communities. But today, we're going to touch on the economics of things. Today, and your comprehensive policy that you put forward with the help of your colleagues, Saving Main Street, fighting for financial stability in the Black community. And I like to start with your preambles, because your preambles, I find them to be quite great. Families, small businesses, and communities have lost so much during this pandemic, and as a result, it's incumbent upon government to act, and I'm just adding that part there for you. But of course, Dr. Lindo, we have seen We have seen the numbers, we have heard the stories, and now the NDP is here to act and to give us some policy alternatives. And we're comparing with what we've seen with the government right now. Just a couple of days ago announced a $300 million package in terms of aid. But of course, for you and for the NDP, too late, as Ms. Horwath said, too much, too little.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would add that oftentimes when governments put forward funding for bigger problems, one of the biggest issues for Black community members is that they are sort of weeded out of that process. There's a long history of any kind of grants and loan programs and such not taking into account the reality of the history of anti-Black racism within our finance sector, for instance, or within the way that they vet applications and make decisions about which organizations will receive funding and which won't. Over the years, we've also had a number of funding sources decide in order to achieve their equity quotas, they will fund one organization, which means the rest of us who are doing all of this work and literally filling gaps where government systems haven't been providing support are not lucky enough to receive that money, or they put together programs that provide piecemeal funding, right? So like project-based funding. Then just as soon as you start to see that what you're doing has made an impact in community and provided support to community, that funding is taken from underneath you and you're back to square one trying to figure out whether or not you can keep those programs or those businesses going. So yes, too little, too late. And I would argue also without an equity lens.
Without equity. So you've had, the proposal is for there to be a designated emergency fund, and that emergency fund would essentially kickstart right now because there's a need to save Black businesses, there's a need to ensure that Black small businesses, right, and a lot of the small businesses and a lot of many businesses that Black people actually own, especially looking here in the Toronto and the Canadian context, is of course minority-owned businesses, right? So the emergency fund, though, expound upon that one for us a little bit.
So the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce did a lot of work talking to ministers from the beginning of the shutdown and the beginning of the pandemic, asking for a designated emergency fund for Black business owners and for entrepreneurs as well, right?
Yes.
The BBPA also made a call saying we've got to take care of Black businesses in our communities, because if we don't pay attention to historically what has happened to our businesses, we're going to find ourselves being dragged even further backwards. The government met with, I know that they met with the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce. I know that they've spoken with the BBPA.
Yes.
Unfortunately, when we had the Finance and Economic Recovery Committee hearings, so I was part of those hearings,
yes.
When I had an opportunity to ask the minister about follow through on specifically the asks from the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce, the response was, we're considering things, you know, we spoke to people, we believe everybody deserves support, but nothing concrete, right?
Yes.
And at the end of the day, for a lot of business owners, I think we've been there before, right? Where people say, yes, we really care about equity and no, there's no systemic racism. But when it comes to the actual pedal to the metal, right? The action behind the words and the promises, we're left behind again. And so I do think it's really important to talk about some of the things that people have tried to do. Like I can tell you that Afrofest, for instance, came to visit us at the Finance and Economic Recovery hearings and spoke about making a phone call to the Trillium Foundation to get some funding for Afrofest. And we're told that they had already provided funding to a racialized organization, and so nobody else was going to be getting any. And that's the kind of reality when it comes to government funding sources. That is what happens to a lot of our small business owners. And those festivals, a lot of the artists, a lot of our community centers do event planning. So those are DJs, the folks that are doing all the decorations, the folks that are in the kitchen doing the food, the people that are greeting, all of those are small business owners.
Yes.
And if we don't find a way to ensure that they are provided with support, that support is sustained, we are going to lose them and we're not going to be able to get them back. And though, to be honest, that's the backbone of our economy. And that if we don't save those people, then we're not saving our economy moving forward.
Absolutely. And so in your proposal that you've put forward, essentially, there's this call to, of course, as you said, as it is stated, keeping workers on the payroll, which includes no evictions, utility freeze. We're talking about standalone emergencies, 75% rent subsidy up to $10,000, as your leader mentioned earlier. Fund for businesses that face historic barriers that we just spoke of. You talk about keeping workers safe. So there's this thing about ensuring that sick days come into play. And sick days actually has been showing up ever so evidently now and coming from the federal level down to the provincial level. I know your federal colleagues in the federal NDP just won a major battle in terms of securing sick days for federal workers. But the province, at the provincial level, you want the sick days to be extended to all working class Canadians, Ontarians here in Ontario.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for us to remember that right before the pandemic, sick days were cut. Yes. And so part of the challenge that we're dealing with is that policies and legislation that this government had pushed through prior to the pandemic is now being proven to be legislation that is truly problematic. And a lot of the calls that we had been making in the opposition, a lot of the caution that we had been speaking to the government about, what happens if, when they decided that they wanted to cut sick days, well, here we are in the middle of a pandemic. And the question is, what do we do now? The government continues to say stay at home, but how do you stay at home if you don't have sick days? The government says, well, we put emergency legislation through that says you can't lose your job. You should be allowed to stay home, but that legislation doesn't say that when you are at home, making sure that you protect yourself and your colleagues at your workplace and the community, the broader community, that you be paid. The legislation doesn't require that. People can't do it. Not to mention the fact that we've got so many community members that are precariously employed. When you're in a part-time job, you don't have the same amount of sick days or the same flexibility as you do if you've got a full-time permanent job. And so I think that that's one of the reasons why that call is so important and why that call has to be answered not just federally, but also provincially. Ontarians are actually protected from the federal government, yes, and protected by the provincial government as well, right?
So when we talk about paid sick days, how many paid sick days are we looking at? Are we looking to go back to the 2 paid and then the 10 days in general? Or are we looking at all 10 being paid or an extension to that, to the amount of days?
So I think that that's a very good question. And I think that part of what we have to do is pay attention to the emergency situation that we're in right now. Okay. So currently the emergency legislation, because we're not talking about this as we were prior to the pandemic, about yes, what is best practice and quality work environment. We're talking about what gets us through a pandemic. And so what the emergency legislation says is that if you are having any symptoms or if you've been in contact with anybody, then you need to stay home. That contact could be, maybe it doesn't happen, or it could be that it happens quite often. We don't know, right? You happen to be in a teacher, for instance, or in working in a hospital, in healthcare, working with older adults, working in a community center, any of those spaces, you may be at higher risk of being in contact with. And no matter what happens, you should be able to stay home. But the current legislation says that you can stay home and you will not be allowed to be fired, but there's no guarantee that you're paid. So what happens for those folks who make the choice, the right choice, to stay home and protect their family and protect the community, but if they can't get paid, then how are they going to survive? And that's where we end up in a problem on top of a problem, right?
Yes.
And so I think at this point, one of the biggest amendments that could be made is to that emergency legislation that requires that those be paid. And that means the province has to provide the support for the small businesses to ensure that they can pay them, or provide the support to the organizations to ensure that they have the money to pay their employees if they have to stay home. And so I do think that it's really, really, really important that when we talk about this, that we don't lose sight of the fact that this is in the middle of a pandemic.
Yes.
And that these are not cautions that we're asking for that are not in our actual midst. This is literally what we're dealing with, and we need to make sure that everybody is able to do what they need to do to ensure that we're all safe.
One of the other things I want to touch in here, because even looking at what the government now has proposed in terms of the commercial rent, most of that is being paid for or being housed through the government, federal government, that is, program of, their emergency commercial rent assistance program. The province doesn't have one that's as built out as the federal government's policy. So essentially, you're proposing a 75% for up to $10,000 per month. That's your commercial rent.
Mm-hmm. So one of the challenges in the federal program is that the decision to access the program lies with the landlord as opposed to lying with the tenant. So one of the big things that we had been hearing is that the tenant says, this is the situation I'm in, I need the support. And the landlord decides, well, I don't want to take the hit because it's not full 100%. And so I'm not going to apply for the program. So that was number one in terms of something that needed to change. But the bigger issue for us, again, because I'm representing the province,
yes,
was that the program was federal. So we can yell at the federal government as much as we want, but we have to actually do the work as well. And that's what we as the opposition, the official opposition, we're calling on the government to do. Okay, fine, there's issues with the federal program. You make sure that you get in touch with them and tell them what those issues are, but that doesn't mean that you don't do the work and you don't provide the support.
Yes.
People are paying their taxes to us provincially. They should make sure that, those public dollars are providing them with the support that they need when they need it. The other issue that we were finding was that for a lot of small business owners, they had been paying insurance, right? Like all businesses have to have their insurance in check. And when they went and put through their applications for business interruption insurance, they were being told that they were denied because COVID didn't constitute one of the types of interruption that they were going to pay out. So now instead of actually receiving that support that they had been paying into, they were seeing that their insurance was actually increasing.
Yes.
A lot of people have told us that they've had increases in their insurance premiums, but no support. And then when they've turned to the provincial government has said, well, no, the feds are going to take care of this. We're going to go and make sure that the federal government takes care of this. Yes. Our call is very simple. We can't rely on the federal government to take care of everything. We are also the government. We are also your government. And we've got to make sure that the policies and programs that we put in place provide you with the support that you need. And if the federal government, alongside the provincial government, were providing proper support, then we wouldn't be losing the businesses at the rate that we're businesses. And so that the commercial freezes, the idea of not being allowed to evict,
yes,
making sure that you have the kinds of funds that you need, those are crucially important opportunities for the province to step up and provide the support to people that they need. It's interesting, there's some businesses that had some areas where they brought in so much that they were able to, for instance, okay, I'm just going to keep my doors closed for the next year and see what happens.
Yes.
But for a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, they don't have that option. And we were being told from a lot of people that they've already gone and used personal finances to try and get them through the first wave.
Yes.
And so if they've even managed to stay open, the second wave, they need that support. And if they weren't able to stay open during the first wave, they're ready to take advantage of the support that, for instance, the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce, again, I know that they were providing mentorship opportunities for people to sort of revamp their skills and or
Yes.
put their businesses online. Nobody can do that without funding support. And the province can't just say, look to the federal government. They have to step up. And that's why this plan is so important, because we are willing to do that. And we would be willing to do that if we were the government.
Absolutely. And also in the policy I'm seeing here is a huge part in terms of really ensuring that our students, and I know your colleague Marit Stiles, she has been sounding those alarms in opposition in terms of getting the Ministry of Education and the minister to act in terms of, for one, reducing class size. We spoke about that the last time you were here, ensuring the safe start in terms of school is well sanitized, social distancing can be maintained, online learning. 15 Marit Stiles and the NDP put class size should be. We heard from Minister Letcher in the past week that they're averaging some 17.5, 16.5 and up to 20.39 in grade 4 to 8. He has also mentioned the fact that they employed over 2,000 new teachers, 92 support workers, education assistants, buses and all this stuff. But it's still not enough. And I heard your colleague Marit Stiles echo this, is that it's too late. And essentially what the government has done is use the federal dollars essentially to finance this program with very little funding from the province's coffers.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we're talking about that, because a lot of people are starting to realize that these are not separate, isolated issues. Yes. That if we don't have safety in our schools, and we can't safely as parents send our children to school, then we can't go to work. And if we can't go to work, we are the ones that are asking for those sick days. And if we have schools that are unsafe, and we get, like the other day, I received a message from one of my children's school saying that a student had tested positive for COVID. Now, I was lucky in that my daughter was not actually in contact with that person. My daughter is doing distance education. My other two are in school. But I thought to myself, what happens to the families that were in contact with the student? So you've got a student who's ill, a whole class that has to isolate for 14 days, right?
Yes.
If they are younger, or if they are special needs, or if they, for whatever reason, cannot be at home by themselves, then you now have to take time out of work to be at home to isolate your child. Not to mention that you have to stand in lines for a long time to try and get your test to see where you're at. And so all of these systems are interconnected. And so the call that Marit Stiles was making for the capping of class sizes, investing in our schools, which was not our call as the official opposition, but it was us saying, listen to the experts, because it was the health experts that were saying 15 is the max. Because you need to physically distance and you don't have the space in the classroom if you have too many kids there. Plus, you need to be able to manage the students that are there.
Absolutely.
And so if you don't do that work, then it's absolutely impossible for you to ensure that people can get back to work and that they can grow the economy and all of the other pieces. Yes. So when the provincial government decides that they're going to take some of the money that they've gotten from the federal government, they're not going to invest it in what they said that they were calling for the money to be used for, then they're leaving all of us in a lurch.
Absolutely. And then we go back into, because we are coming up on time here, back on this whole thing of restaurants, because restaurants have particularly many small businesses lying in the food and service sector, and restaurants have been hard hit. We've heard calls from the Premier calling on services like Uber Eats to reduce commission rates, reduce service. But you're essentially saying here, just limit the fees. And I want to ask too particularly, what is the scope of the provinces and the Premier's power in actually getting Uber Eats, getting DoorDash, getting Skip the Dishes to reduce those rates? Is it an ask? Is it an order? Policy can do it?
Yeah, well, here's what I know to be true. When the leadership in a community demonstrate that this is what is needed to keep people healthy and safe, yes, then businesses follow suit. And I think that part of the challenge is that the government will often do press conferences and tell you sort of stories about how their heart aches for the people that are impacted by COVID, but they don't show leadership to indicate and signal to the people that are putting fees up, or to the, you know, the insurance companies who are deciding that they're going to increase policy amounts instead of, or the fees, the insurance premiums, rather than decrease them during this, or they're not going to follow through with their part of the bargain, or ensuring that, you know, employees are able to have their paid sick days. If they don't signal with their actions, then nothing happens. We end up in the same pickle that we're in right now. And so I do think that it's really important. The government does speak a good game about, you know, being in positive relationship with the folks that would be making these decisions.
Yes.
But those positive relationships should mean that you signal what is needed and that they would follow through. If they're not following through and they think this is time to hike fees, when people have to rely on that, especially folks that I think about, some of the older adults in community who just want to get like an oxtail dinner, right? Because that's what they want. I know that the Jamaican Canadian Association, for instance, was doing a whole ton of work during the first wave to ensure that food, Jamaican food, was given to Jamaican elders across Toronto, right?
Yes.
And they were doing that work because how would these folks that are already living in difficult times prior to COVID be able to afford expensive fees to get food that they need delivered? And so I just think there has to be, if we say that we have a relationship, and if the government claims that they are all about business and the business community and they're the ones who know about business, then they should also be the ones that know about the people behind those businesses, the people that are being served in the businesses, the people that are being served by the businesses, and the people that are growing in those businesses. And at this point, when they're not willing to do something that's that simple, then it makes me question how much they know about that community.
Absolutely. And I wanted to say, so thank you so much for elaborating on all this here, because, and we also, I was also speaking with Horwath, and she went through the whole rigmarole of the policy and her recovery plan in terms of long-term care, and how that all culminates with everything that we have seen here. So it's resilience from all our communities that have been affected, building back and building back stronger. That's a term we were going with.
Yes.
But so we heard Premier Ford, $300 million, small businesses. We heard all the plans that he has, this massive plan in terms of getting PPEs in, getting sanitization instruments in to these long-term care homes and businesses and all that. But the question is, right, and this goes back to the NDP, right, we're talking about an election 2 years from now, right? How will all this play out during that time? And looking into the future, what will Ontarians be looking for in that election period or that election cycle? What are they looking to hear from? What do you think they're looking to hear from you? And what are they looking to hear from the government who will succeed, whether succeed the PC government, or if it's a PC government that will be there after this next election cycle?
You know what? That's a really good question, because leading up to any election, politicians have ideas about what it is that's important to the people in their ridings and the people in the broader province, right? Yes. So we often talk, like, there are key things that you'll hear politicians speak about. They'll talk about healthcare, they'll talk about education, they'll talk about business and the economy, they'll talk about housing, and they'll talk about sort of affordability more general in the world. But a lot of those discussions prior to 2020 have been with an idea of guessing what you would need to be prepared for a crisis. Yeah. So you just sort of imagine, and we've had crises, like the SARS epidemic, like we've had moments in history where we've needed certain services, but we've never had anything at the scale of COVID. And so I think that given that we're going to have an election in the midst of this situation where we're either going to be recovering from a pandemic or still in the midst of another wave of a pandemic, people are going to take more seriously what our plans are in different parties to ensure that people are protected if something happens, because now we've gone through an if. And so for a lot of people who are okay with taking money from healthcare or taking money from education and putting it elsewhere, now they are thinking, whoa, that was not a good idea, because look at what happened. And so I think come election time, they're going to be looking for ways for us to invest in. And sadly, we're going to be in a position, the decisions of the current government, where we have to rebuild. So healthcare was already in a pickle prior. Education was already underfunded. A lot of racialized communities, for instance, were saying, where's the money to do equity education across the board or update the curriculum so that we see ourselves reflected? Those were all things that were already being asked of us before the pandemic. Now more money has been taken out. And so by the time we get to the next election, I think people are going to be looking for real investments in social services, because they will remember what it was like to not have those investments and have those pieces of legislation and that trust in the political folks that are overseeing us in crisis when they didn't have them in place. They're going to remember that. And so I do think that there's going to be a lot of talk about rebuilding healthcare, ensuring that our public system is invested in. I think there's going to be real attention to support for older adults. Making sure that our elders and community are provided with what they need to thrive. I think that there's going to be real memory of those that we've lost. And so it's going to be much harder to make up a figurative platform that doesn't address some of that, because people are going to be mourning at the time of the next election, still, feeling the loss, the heaviness of those that they've lost in the midst of this pandemic. And they will need their government in a different way that they may not have thought that they would ever need them.
Absolutely. And just before you go, Dr. Lindo, just a quick summation as to what both of these policy papers are saying, just to get a nice little bow on all this discussion before we dip from the air.
So if I was going to bring these policy pieces together, it would be very simple. Investing in our lives, investing in community. It's recognizing that when we invest and we surround people with a circle of care and love and compassion, that we will be prepared. We're better prepared for the unknown. I think that is the critical message that comes from this policy platform. I think when I ran in the 2018 election, I loved our platform because it was about hope. And I feel like this particular platform has taken that hope and it's turned it into just love for community. And that's what investing in community actually looks like.
Absolutely. I want to just say thank you so much for having joined me here. Again, always a pleasure, as I said, to have on the show. Always pertinent information discussed, and always something for us to think about as we head to those polls in 2022. But of course, for all of those you're at home or tuned in today, we have presented to you the Saving Main Street, invested in communities, and of course ensuring that we build back better and stronger according to the NDP. Definitely, if you want to go check these out for yourself, you can of course go visit your website. And the website is, Ms. Lindo?
If you go to the ONDP website, you can find everything there. It's also all over our social media. I do quick Google searches for any of these. If I look at Invest in Lives, I find them. And our seniors platform is also really important to look at right now, especially as we enter into, we're entering into the second wave of COVID.
And as I said, thank you so much for joining me here again. And I certainly do hope that you'll be back in the future. But of course, please enjoy the rest of your day. And for all you're welcome. You're welcome. And for all our viewers who are tuned in today, thank you so much for having joined us. This was quite an impactful discussion we've had. Been joined by leader of the official opposition, Ms. Andrea Horwath, and then by the Black Caucus Chair, Dr. Laura May Lindo, to break down their policy here for me. Huge thank you to them. Huge thank you to my sponsor, AOF Immigration Canada, for keeping us on here each week through their kind sponsorship. Don't forget to give them a call. It's 416-629-4617, or you can send them an email. It's at info@aofimmigration.com, or you can also visit their offices. They're located at 5800 Ambler Drive in Mississauga, Ontario. I want to send a huge thank you to my in-studio team for keeping us on air each week. Thank you so much. And of course, to you at home, as we always say, until next time, 3 p.m. until 4 p.m. Saturdays, same host, Romain Redman, right here on the #1 station in the GTA, GBKM FM. Just keep reaching, keep achieving, and keep changing the world. See you next week.
Hello, my name is Miriam Akpata, host of Global News Check. Debuting on Thursday, November 5th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the award-winning television station in Canada, JBKM. On Global News Check, I'll be bringing you burning issues all over the world as it affects you and I. I'll be asking questions and interviewing key players in the industry. I'll be bringing to the table the truth behind the truth. Don't forget to join me on www.gbkm.tv. Global News Check, where we bring the truth to the front line.